Bible is full of stories that we all know and love. But how well do we know them? The answer might surprise you. The Bible you thought you knew is going to dive deep into the exquisite details of the biblical stories that make them fascinating and transforming. In the last couple of podcasts, we have been dealing with Mordecai, Esther, King Ahasuerus, and Haman as their story is recounted in the little Book of Esther. This week we will conclude that story. In the last segment, Haman was ignominiously hanged on the absurdly tall gallows he had erected for Mordecai's execution. He had thought that when the king asked his advice about how to honor someone who has pleased the king, surely the monarch was talking about him. But the king had Mordecai in mind, whom he wanted to honor because he had warned him about an assassination attempt. Haman's hubris led to the king being made aware of Haman's nefarious plot to exterminate the Jews in the realm. Recall that Haman planned this to punish Mordecai for his perceived insolence. Now, Haman is no longer a threat. Not only had Esther managed to avert the disaster that Haman had in mind, but the king also put her in charge of Haman's house. That's in verse 1 of chapter 8. Moreover, now that Esther informed her husband of her relationship to Mordecai, he had an audience with the king. Astonishingly, King Ahasuerus gave Mordecai the ring that had been on Haman's finger, presumably a royal ring indicating high office. That gesture allowed Queen Esther to put her cousin, Mordecai, in charge of Haman's house. This was a stunning turn of events. That's in verse 2. At this point, Esther leaves nothing to chance. Even though Haman had been executed, the papers he had drawn up to doom the Jewish population were still in effect. So, Esther appealed to the king to change those orders and save her people. She noted that if she was as favored as the king had indicated, he would surely allow her to undo Haman's terrible handiwork. The king agreed with his queen, noting that he had already had Haman executed and given his queen the man's house. In this instance, the noun house probably means a bureaucratic office of some sort. In any case, the queen was permitted to alter the orders condemning the Jewish people. That's in verses 3 through 8. Not only did Queen Esther alter the orders, she sealed them with the king's ring, thus rendering them irrevocable. The details of this incredible royal edict are at this point narrated. The king's secretaries were enlisted to draft the papers at Mordecai's direction. Then, these written laws were sent to every province in the realm. They were written in the languages of the people who lived in this kingdom, including, of course, in Hebrew, so that the Jewish population could be covered. All these laws were written in the king's name and signed with his seal. Again, this made the law irrevocable. But these laws did not simply mandate that no one was to harm the Jews or allow Jews to defend themselves if attacked. They also gave permission for Jews to avenge themselves against anyone who tried to harm them. The Jews were no longer a hunted minority. Having Esther as queen had miraculously put the Jews in a very enviable position. That's in verses 9 through 14. Of course, this led to celebration among the Jews. Mordecai went to Susa, decked out in royal finery. He was met there by delighted Jews. Every city and every province experienced this joyous celebration. Soon, this was enjoyed as a feast and an appropriate holiday. All of a sudden, it was seen as a great benefit to be Jewish, Non-Jewish people took the clue and began to declare themselves Jewish. That's in 15 and 16 of chapter 8. Many people were afraid of not being Jewish. That is how radically the situation had changed. But the Jews did more than escape a dreadful fate. They turned the tables on their enemies. The very day on which the Jews were slated for annihilation became a day when Jews turned the tables. Fear of Jews had become widespread. Plus, the Jews had the support of officials throughout the realm. Mordecai had become a powerful figure in King Ahasuerus's kingdom. Once designated as a candidate for execution, he became a man to be feared. He had become famous. This gave the Jews an opportunity to take vengeance on all who were about to harm them. They took that opportunity. Any who had plotted to destroy Jews or any who hated Jews were then summarily slaughtered. In Susa itself, 500 men who had thought to annihilate the Jews were themselves killed. Ironically, the 10 sons of Haman, the ringleader of those who wanted to eliminate Jews, were also killed. All their names are listed. The Jews dealt only with those who wanted their destruction. They did not enrich themselves with plunder. That's the first 10 verses of chapter 9. This slaughter was reported to the king. Then he asked his queen, Esther, whether there was anything else he could do for her and her people. She asked for the sons of Haman to be displayed on gallows, presumably to show them off publicly and dissuade anyone of ever plotting Jewish destruction again. The king complied with this request and issued an edict to support this action. On that very day, the Jews killed another 300 men who were among their enemies. Once again, we are told that they took no plunder in the process. That's in verses 11 through 15 of chapter 9. This huge Jewish victory was soon to be transformed into a holiday. Jews outside of Susa took the lives of 75,000 who had joined in the plot to kill them. This Jewish ascendancy was a major transformation in the realm. Though the Jews kept their hands off of plunder, their enemies were largely destroyed. As a consequence, on the 14th and the 15th day of the month of Adar, a celebration was to be held. The 2 days reflected the different actions of urban and rural Jews. In any case, it was a day of feasting, resting, and general enjoyment. That's in verses 16 through 19 of chapter 9. Given his lofty position, Mordecai was able to make the holiday official. All the Jews in the kingdom of Ahasuerus were enjoined to celebrate the day when they were saved from their enemies. In addition to rejoicing over their new status, the day was also to be celebrated with gifts to one another, and gifts also to the poor. That's in verses 20 to 22 of chapter 9. At this juncture, the Book of Esther provides a summary of what had taken place and why the celebration got a name. In sum, Haman had designed a plan to eliminate the Jews. To do this, he had cast lots. The word for a lot is pur, therefore its plural form is Purim. Henceforth, the celebration of Jews escaping annihilation and inflicting punishment on those who were behind the planned Holocaust became known as Purim, the Feast of the Lots. From now on, Jews would hold this celebration in perpetuity. This holiday was to be a perpetual memory of the remarkable events orchestrated by Mordecai and Queen Esther. That's verses 23 to 28 of chapter 9. Because of their impressive offices in King Ahasuerus' realm, the keeping of this holiday became more than a custom for Jews. In effect, it became a law. Queen Esther's command fixed the practices for Purim for all time. The command was put into writing. That's in verses 29 to 32. The final short chapter of this little book lets us know that King Ahasuerus' many accomplishments are recorded in the Chronicles of the Kings of Media and Persia. Among these accomplishments was the king's empowering Mordecai and promoting him to such a high position. We are even informed that Mordecai's rank was over everyone except the king himself. Of course, the Jewish population extolled Mordecai because he had sought the welfare of his people and, in the final statement of the book, spoke peace to all his people. A few reflections on this little book are in order. It is easy to understand why many in the Jewish community were nervous about canonizing this material. God is never mentioned, and divine providence is, at best, merely implied. It was Esther's beauty, not her character, that found favor by the king, who proceeded to replace his former queen with the beautiful Esther. By chance, Mordecai was able to alert the king of a plot against him. Was God responsible for any of this? Again, there may be a hint of providence, but only a hint. Still, when Mordecai tells Esther that, quote, for such a time as this, end of quote, she had attained her exalted status, providence may be legitimately inferred. At the same time, many biblical stories show God working through ordinary human schemes, not all of which are even moral or ethical. Think of Jacob's convincing his brother to sign away his birthright for a bowl of soup, or Rebekah engaging her younger son Jacob to deceive her husband and his father into blessing the younger rather than the older son Esau. In that sense, providence in the Book of Esther is just beneath the surface. Almost certainly, in historical terms, this story is a legend. But it is a necessary legend. At least it provides a smidgen of hope that once in a while Jewish persecution gets turned on its head. It is difficult not to enjoy the irony of Haman's thinking that the king most certainly was looking for a way to honor him. The enjoyment is increased when Haman's efforts to do away with Mordecai in such a spectacular display were reversed in such a public way. Even the slaughter of the Jewish enemies is somewhat mitigated by the statement that this was done for moral reasons. Greed played no part. I end with this anecdote. Once I was sitting on a committee with clergy in Seattle. It was an ecumenical committee. There were Roman Catholics, Protestants, and Jews on the committee. Before the committee's deliberations were over, a prominent rabbi asked to be excused. Another member of the committee asked the rabbi why he was leaving so early. There was still business to do. The response was that he was about to celebrate Purim. He told the rest of us that in his community, it was appropriate, even demanded, to drink enough wine that one could no longer distinguish between the words, "Cursed be Haman," or "Blessed be Mordecai." With that explanation, the rabbi left. Let me encourage you to go to my website, faspina.com. Let me know your email there, so I'll have a way to contact you. If you have a question that you'd like me to answer in a Q&A session, email me at fspina106@gmail.com. I want to thank you so very much for listening to The Bible You Thought You Knew. I have a question for you. Do you have a question or topic that you'd like me to cover on the podcast? If so, All you need to do is head over to Apple Podcasts and do two simple things. One, leave a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. Two, in that review, ask anything you want related to the Bible. That's all you have to do. Then, listen in to hear your question answered on a future episode. Join us next time on The Bible You Thought You Knew when we discuss Jesus' personal Bible. God bless.